Hello and welcome to West Indies on 99.94 Cricket Every Day. My name is Mashal St. Patrick Hewitt, one half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. And with me as ever is Santoki Nagulendran, the other half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. West Indies on 99.94 is your new home for West Indies cricket content. And we'll be dropping into your podcast feed on YouTube or the 99.94 app several times every week. So rate, review, like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation. So, Santoki, we're back. We're back live and in the flesh. And today on West Indies on 99.94, we're going to be talking about the West Indies triumphant 1-0 win away to Zimbabwe in the recently concluded Test series. Santoki, take it away.
Yeah, Mash, it's only licks when we touch down, you know. The West Indies are back. As you said, an away series win against Zimbabwe, 1-0. The first test was drawn mainly due to rain, and the second test we won within 3 days by an innings and 4 runs. A lot of records broken along the way, which we're going to go into. But I think first, Mash, it's important to say a lot of fans will say, well, it's only Zimbabwe. They were missing players. Firstly, I think you can only beat who's in front of you, the opposition you have. And regardless of who you're playing in Test cricket, an away win is an away win. So very, very much needed win for West Indies, and also good signs looking ahead to the South Africa tour. So I think, Mash, is a lot of people will say, as we said, oh, it's only Zimbabwe. But I think we're right. We're in our rights to celebrate this win.
Yeah, listen, at the end of the day, we have to be realistic, right? West Indies, after this series, I think we've now moved up to 6th in the ICC rankings. Obviously, some people say, but how does that pertain to the World Test Championship? Obviously, this series doesn't relate to the World Test Championship, but Zimbabwe are in it. But I think realistically, when you're in the West Indies position as a test side, and we could even include the kind of white ball sides, you've got to beat who's in front of you. Put it this way, if we had lost to Zimbabwe, we'd never hear the end of it. The cuss out in the Caribbean would have been the greatest cuss out of all time. So you can't on one hand say, well, boy, you've got this doesn't count for anything because it's only Zimbabwe, when we know what would have happened if we'd lost to Zimbabwe. So then you have to think about, well, what does a good win look like? The first test was rain interrupted. So I think within reason, you can say, well, you know, what were we supposed to do with that? The second test, we won in 2 3/4 days. So in my mind, we did what we should have done, given the available time and conditions, to say it's par for the course at the bare minimum.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you look at the second test, we probably exceeded expectations in terms of the manner in which we bowled out Zimbabwe and the performances there. So a lot to talk about. But Mash, let's head into the first test, even though it was a draw. Monumental performance at the top of the order. We've been lamenting since probably Chris Gale retired from Test in 2014 about there needing to be a suitable partner for Craig Brathwaite. And it looks like we found it in Tagenarine and Chanderpaul, a record-breaking 336 run opening partnership. Lasted 3 days. I didn't think it would end at any point. And just to clarify, it broke the record for highest West Indian opening stand set by Greenwich and Haynes. And Mash, just how would you describe that innings? It was something else, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think without kind of underplaying what Craig did. I mean, Craig scored 182, and that's kind of gone under the radar. And I think one of the reasons why that's gone under the radar is Craig's form from 2022 to now, Craig might even say before 2022, has been so good that we almost took that 182 as just, yeah, well, that's Craig Brathwaite. That's what he does, right? But that was a monumental knock in and of itself. I believe it's his highest test score. And almost signpost the exact reason why Craig would have been named in the ICC Team of the Year. Like, he's just carrying on that form, right? But obviously the key talking point was Tage's knock, the 207 not out. And I think the best way to put it, Santoki, is some players end their test careers with no centuries, much less double centuries. Tage has got a double century inside his first 7 test match innings. I think where I'd want to go first, though, Santoki, is there's maybe I just feel like there's been a bit too much desire for people to draw the inevitable parallels with Shiv. But I think we've got a duty here as a West Indian-based platform to just remind people that Tage is a player in his own right. And I'll let you expound on this, Santoki. And it's also worth reminding people that, yes, the Shiv parallels make sense, but Tage was actually, in terms of his cricketing ability, his granddad played a huge role in Tage's development. And that's not to underplay Shiv's influence. But if we're going to talk about Tage and the Chanderpaul name, we've got to put a lot of respect on Kemraj's name.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Kemraj Chanderpaul, he trained Shivnarine Chanderpaul in Unity Village in Guyana, got him test match ready. And as we all know, what a fruitful career Shivnarine had, 164 tests for the West Indies. And similar to Tage Narine, I think Chanderpaul was living in Florida for many years during Tage Narine's upbringing. So it was down to the responsibility was on Kemraj to sort of train Chanderpaul. So this legacy goes, as you said, the Chanderpaul legacy goes beyond just Shivnarine. It goes to the grandfather Kemraj. There's obviously been a lot of work and investment, and it's obviously starting to pay off. Tage Narine's 26. It's unfortunate that he could have been playing earlier for West Indies, but it is what it is. At this point in time, we're seeing him successful within the early stages of his career. I guess another thing that's surprising for fans is that he's actually scored higher than Shivnarine ever did in Test cricket, 207. But then, as you said, there's differences because Shivnarine generally batted in the middle order. Towards the latter end of his career, he batted with the tail end. So at the top of the order, Tage Narine is obviously going to have more opportunities and time to put a high score together. But I think what I really liked about the performance against Zimbabwe, it wasn't a simple case of, how many balls did he even last? It was 467 in that innings. It wasn't a case of, he was playing defensive and he was just blocking it out, going for singles. He actually hit a few sixes, a few boundaries, sweeping shots across the pitch. So he's actually a very, very good all-round player. And I think potentially in the future, we could see him go into limited overs. He's got that capability. So the fact that he's not a one-dimensional player as well and seems to evolve and adapt, and he hasn't even played a test at home in the Caribbean yet. It's all been away test. So it does look very, very optimistic in terms of West Indies' future with Craig and Tage Narine hopefully forming a partnership for years to come. But Michelle, the flip side of that is in that first innings or in the test in general, the Mammoth opening partnership essentially gave a free ride to the middle order batters. There was no pressure on them to score at all. So if you're Roston Chase, Jermaine Blackwood, Carl Mayers, you were loving that first test.
Yeah, there was no pressure on them to score, so they didn't score. But yeah, I think we have to look at West Indies cricket in the context. I mean, I think we've spoken about how England want to have Bazball. We want to champion Grime Ball. Some people have called it Chanderball, whatever they want to call it, right? But fundamentally, we have to have our own kind of USP, so to speak, in terms of what is our style. And I think going forward, particularly against the more difficult tours, so South Africa's up next, for example, India coming in the summer, the best way that West Indies can compete is starting with a solid foundation. And that means Tage and Craig. And we've spoken about it at length, Santoki, about soaking up the balls and at least putting us in the match to begin with. When we beat England last summer, which English cricket have tried to memory hole like it never happened. When we beat England last summer, the whole point and foundation of that series victory was about players like Craig and Nkrumah Bonner soaking up the balls to lay the platform to then go on and beat England in Grenada. Carl Mayer's doing his bits and pieces with the ball, etc., etc. So this is our foundation. And finding Tage, granted, as you and I both said, 2 years too late, has now helped lay that foundation. But it's probably, Santoki, an interesting segue into our next point. And before we get into it, let's take a break because you must know where I'm going next with this, Santoki. So let's take a quick break and come back on the other side.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
So Santoki, we can talk about Tage, we can talk about Craig and the excellent foundation they lay for West Indies being able to compete in Test matches. And we must remember that they did it in Australia as well. I think they put on 100+ partnership in Australia in that first test when we briefly looked like we might be able to compete against the Australians. Now, one of the key players when we beat England last year in starting our grind ball revolution was Nkrumah Bonner. Probably the only other player, maybe Josh De Silva you want to throw in there as well, but probably the only other player in our test squad who has a desire to soak up balls and occupy the crease is Nkrumah Bonner. But Santoki, Nkrumah Bonner travelled to Zimbabwe and did not play. Raymond Reefer took his place at number 3. Granted, Reefer scored 250, so we can chop that up and get into that. But on the eve of us recording this, Bonner's now been dropped from the squad altogether and won't even be going to South Africa. So Santoki, if our style is grind ball, why have we dropped one of our champions of grind ball, Santoki, who averages 38 in 15 test matches? Help me understand this, Santoki, because all now I still can't get my head around it.
Listen, the grind ball revolution was sweet while it lasted, but we've lost a fundamental champion of the revolution. And I'm just as puzzled as you, Mash. Nkrumah Bonner has been someone during the pandemic was a star of the West Indies Test side. Performances against that famous away win against Bangladesh, the century against Sri Lanka, as you said, the century earlier last year against England. He's just been a consistent player. 38 for West Indies in Test cricket. You might as well say that. You might as well double that for in terms of West Indian averages, in terms of the quality we have. So it's baffling he was dropped. I'm not sure why. It could be, in the media, we've seen in the Caribbean media, a lot of people talk about his susceptibility to pace, not being able to play pace. So maybe they were trying to prepare Reefer for the South Africa tour where pace will be critical. But I just think, he's had a few concussions. He's missed a few innings. He hasn't really been given a fair opportunity to even... He hasn't lost form. He hasn't played and lost form, essentially. He's missed out on games because he did not bat. But he hasn't lost enough form, considering when you look for the last 5 years, how many players have been given extended runs within the team. It just seems like he's been cut very, very early. And what's critical is he's just turned 34 years old. We only play 2 more tests later this year against India. By the time we play next year, 2024, he'll be 35 years old. Do you really see West Indian selectors reselecting Bonner age 35 to come into the test side? So it just seems a premature end to his sort of test career at the moment. And for the life of me, even if he's susceptible to pace, I still can't believe why they've completely dropped him from the South Africa tour. It's something which I would love to ask the selectors, Desmond Haynes and Roland Butcher, because there is no clear and logical answer to that, Mash.
Yeah, and that's my issue. I can't find... You know that both of us ultimately, like when we go to South Africa, we're still rallying. Just because we don't understand why Bonner's being dropped doesn't mean we're not rallying anymore. But we have a desire to just see sense, just clear, transparent, logical, rational sense that explains decisions that are made in West Indies cricket. And this one, I can't see it. Now, Santoki, in fairness, there may be a logic, but if there is, they haven't announced it. Like if when they put in the press release, Royal boy, we've told Bonner to go back to the Caribbean because we believe that right now he's not in the best of form in the warm-up games and in the nets. We think he would benefit from some domestic games. You know what? I wouldn't agree with it, but I'd understand it if they kind of gave me some rationale and transparency. And this is the wider issue I've got, Santoki. We've seen players in West Indies cricket in the recent past get a massive amount of games to find form. So I think of somebody like a Shea Hope. I think of someone like a Roston Chase. We've even seen in recent times Roston Chase get dropped from the side, not do anything to warrant a recall to the side, and then just get back in the side. So when you see things like that, and this isn't about digging out Roston Chase, I'm just using it as an example. When you see things like that, it then doesn't make sense when you suddenly see, well, so Bonner's being dropped because he got hit in Australia, and because a year earlier against South Africa, he got hit as well. So that's just it now. He's done. This is the same guy who, in the England series, scored 123. That was only 2 series ago. So what's the rationale here? And to give an example, Santoki, Carl Mayers, and I like Carl Mayers. So again, this isn't about digging out Carl Mayers. I'm just using an example. Carl Mayers has only recorded one score above 50 in his last 20 Test match innings, and that was 146 against Bangladesh last summer. So my point being, if we're allowing Mayers to play his way through that, how comes Bonner gets 5 innings after that 123 against England, gets licked down in Australia, and then it's like goodbye, see you later. So, so I'm looking at you, Santoki, like you can give me some answers, but I know you can't give me nothing to help me understand it.
The only thing I can think of is obviously Mayers has the ability with the ball as well to take wickets. And if you look in the first test against Zimbabwe, I think we played 9 bowlers in the first innings against Zimbabwe. So it might just be selectors are looking at in terms of we can't rely on our bowlers in Test cricket, our premium bowlers to take wickets. We have to bring in people who can offer that part-time option, which would explain why Raymond Reefer was selected in the side. Because if you're looking based on batting performances, I mean, against Bangladesh, I don't think Reefer scored that many runs. He didn't play against Australia. So in the same regard, if you're dropping Bonner for perceived lack of form, what is the justification for bringing Raymond Reefer in? Because he didn't perform in the last series he played against Bangladesh. So as you said, Mash, it's not like we're digging out any players here, but we just want clear and transparent answers as to the process behind selection, because there seems to be double standards at the moment going across the West Indies side.
100%. But if we look on the flip side, though, Santoki, Reefer played, and my thing is always the same. If you get your chance, however that chance comes, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, whatever it may be, you better take that chance. And to be fair, Santoki, Reefer recorded 2 Test match 50s, his first 2 Test match 50s. So, I mean, to be fair to him, he's now locked in to play in South Africa. Whether he is good enough to be a Test match number 3, well, that's open for debate. But I think it's fair to say, Santoki, that he's taken the opportunity, however fortunate, he's taken the opportunity that's been afforded to him.
Yeah, he's cashed in. As you said, he secured his place on the South Africa tour with those half centuries. So he's made the most of the opportunity, and you can't really begrudge him for his performances. So yeah, it's unfortunate for Bonner, but I don't see Bonner playing Test match cricket at least this year for West Indies, just because I think Reefer cemented his place. Against South Africa, it would be a completely different story. It'd be interesting to see, but I don't think personally any of our middle order batters will perform well in South Africa. So in that regard, I don't think Reefer will stand out for any loss of form. So yeah, Reefer made the most of his opportunities. All the best to him, but I would like some answers regarding Bonner. Now, Mash, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the king of spin, Gudakesh Moti.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
Now, Mash, being a Guyanese West Indies Test fan over the last few years, we've seen some harsh days. You know, Vishal Singh, Rajendra Chandjikar, Leon Johnson. They've come and they've gone within the matter of weeks. But now it's a time to celebrate. Not only have we got Tejnarayan Chanderpaul, we've got the spin king himself, Gudakesh Moti, 13 wickets in that second test against Zimbabwe, breaking records, West Indies records for a spinner. I think Sunny Ramadan had held the record. He single-handedly essentially carried West Indies to a win with the ball in that test. Just how how impressed were you with Moti and his performances in that second test in particular?
Listen, Santoki, before I even get into that, because I know you were away for a bit of that second test, and I meant to send you a message. You sure your peoples ain't related to Moti? Moti's out here looking like your cousin, you know. What's going on, Santoki? You got any relation to Moti? Tell me, man. but on a serious one, do you know what? We have to give him all the flowers, because I think you've spoken about this at length before, Santoki. Being a spinner in West Indies cricket is probably one of the hardest jobs in terms of the established 4-member nations, because you never truly get a run. And before Moti, let's just look at the last 3 spinners that have been in the West Indies side. Versamy Permaul, couple tests, out. Jamel Warrican, test here, test there, out. Rakeem Cornwall, couple tests, test here, test there, out. So my thing is this. Multi's just taken 19 wickets in a series, irrespective of what people want to say about Zimbabwe, this, that. You still have to take the wickets, right? Multi's taken 19 wickets in a series at 14 apiece. I know it's not his test debut. Obviously, he debuted versus Bangladesh, but it felt like his proper test debut. This is a guy, Santolki, who has been putting up the numbers in domestic cricket for quite some time. And it's interesting because Multi got his debut in white ball cricket first, kind of like an Akil Hussain, when arguably you could have said that he should have got the test debut first because he's more suited for that format. I think more than, though, just giving him his flowers for a magnificent performance, I think what's crucial moving forward, Santolki, is how the selectors now treat him. Historically, West Indies don't always play a spinner. They love to do the Roston Chase thing, where it's like, oh, Chase will do our spin duties. I would just love to see now, Santolki, irrespective of where we go, in the same way how Australia will play Nathan Lyon, no matter where they're going. I'd like us to now look at Multi and say, you know what? You are the spinner. You are our spinner going forward. You're going to play. We've got full confidence in you. We're not going to just play you, drop you, etc., etc. You're the guy now. What's your views on that, Santolki?
Yeah, I would love that to happen. It's just, as you said, Mash, history doesn't favour that sort of philosophy. I think West Indies, firstly, our legacy since the 70s was built on pace bowling. So there's always a tendency, I'll give Permaul an example, performed really well in Sri Lanka, got bags of wickets, went to England, didn't perform well on pitches which didn't necessarily suit spin, and then was completely dropped from the side. He wasn't given that extended run in the team. It's just because we have a tendency to, when it's not going well, to ditch spin, because in the past when we've ditched spin, it's ended up being successful for West Indies. So I think there needs to be a mentality shift in terms of that. But yeah, I would love to see Moti given that extended run. I mean, I'll give credit to the selectors. Obviously, this time last year, you were looking at Permaul and Warrican being ahead of the pecking order. They backed Moti as the go-to guy, and he's sort of paid off dividends in this Zimbabwe series. The thing I'd like to know, though, is if in South Africa, spin won't be as conducive, we'd expect pace to be more effective. So if it doesn't go well there, do they drop him for the India series is the thing. That's going to be the real test. If they pick him against India, despite any poor performances against South Africa, that will be a sign that, we've changed our mentality. We'll go with Moti as the guy, as our spin option, because I do think in modern Test cricket, as you mentioned, a perfect example, Nathan Lyon for Australia, you always need a full-time spinner. We can't just be out here relying on Roston Chase and Craig Brathwaite to pop up with a few wickets. We need a specialist spinner for conditions. So I would like to see that. But interestingly, Mash, I just want to talk about this point. It mirrors we talked about Tage and Craig taking pressure off the middle order batters. Moti basically took 19 out of the 40 wickets in the series were down to Moti. The next highest wicket taker were Holder and Azari with 5. Are you concerned about our pace bowling going into the South Africa series? We obviously played Kimar Roach in one test, Shannon Gabriel in one test. Sort of who would you go to, firstly, out of those two for the first test in South Africa? And secondly, are you concerned about the quality of our pace bowling? Do you think that this wasn't an opportunity for them to test themselves?
So I'm going to pay deference here to a friend of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast who made the same point as you a couple of days ago, Shane. And Shane said, if you actually study the stats of West Indies cricket over the last maybe year and a half, we don't actually often take 20 wickets. And I went to research it, and he was right. We don't, generally speaking, take the 20 wickets. I know we did against Bangladesh, so to speak, when we beat them in the summer, but you saw what happened in Australia, for example. The kind of modus operandi when we play, particularly away from home, is that the opposition ground us into the ground and then they just declare on us. So you're asking a legitimate question, Santolki, and even more so than that, we have to be mindful of the fact that Kimar and Shannon are both 34 or 33, 34. So the next question is, who's waiting in the wings? We know Alzari is, but Alzari's not even taken a Test match fifer before in his career. I know he's improving, but he's not taking a Test match fifer. And maybe we'll talk about this in later episodes. They've just called up Akeem Jordan, who's only ever played 5 first-class matches. So there is Jason Holder. Arguably, there's some people who are asking questions about him which maybe again we'll leave for another episode and another time, Santoki. So arguably, after, do you remember when we went to England in 2020 during the pandemic, and the kind of narrative then was, West Indies have had a pace bowling resurgence, and they kind of had that. they had the picture of Shannon, Kimar, Jason, and Alzari. Well, 3 years later, it's still Shannon, Kimar, Jason, and Alzari, but arguably the bowling's dropped off. So I think you're right, and some of that's to do with injuries, I hasten to add, with Shannon and so on and so forth. So I think you're asking a legitimate question, Santoki. Do we have an attack that takes 20 wickets, or maybe going full circle to how we started this segment of the show, maybe multi is actually the missing element of the attack, because we're now willing to say we have a frontline spinner that we're choosing to back to balance out the attack. I don't know, Santoki. It's a difficult issue.
I would love to actually talk to Kurt Liambos about sort of bowling in the region, because it's not just red ball cricket. We've seen it in white ball cricket, the T20 World Cup. We just don't have strike bowlers who can take wickets. It seems to be a problem across development of bowling in the region, and there will be massive questions asked. I think, as you've rightly pointed out, Jaden Seals and Anderson Phillip are both injured, so Shannon Gabriel's essentially had to come out of the wilderness. But in South Africa, where fast bowling is going to be key, it will be down to the likes of Gabriel, Roach, Joseph to take those wickets on those spicy pitches. So it is a massive concern, but as we always say with West Indies cricket, we're working with a limited talent pool. So we just have to hope that, the experience of Roach and Gabriel can get us through to South Africa.
Yeah, most definitely, Santoki. And listen, I'm wary of the time here, because I just touched on a few issues there, which if we try and get into, it's going to take us into next week to finish discussing these points. So what I'll say to those listening is, because I'm fairly certain a lot of people listening to this and watching this will say, but what about the test match squad that's being called up to go to South Africa? What about the changes? What are you going to say about that? People, this was a Zimbabwe series review. We'll look forward to the South Africa series in some upcoming episodes. But Santoki, I think let's look it off there. Let's promise the people that we'll be back with a South Africa preview. Any last words, Santoki?
Yeah, if you're watching this live, we're broadcasting live on Twitter and YouTube at the moment. Thank you for tuning in. A few comments I can see in the box. If you're not watching it live, if you do ever want to watch it back on YouTube, you'll have to click the live tab to see our videos. They're not with the general videos. So if you do want to find us, if you're wondering where all the West Indies 99.94 videos, they're under the live tab, which you can watch them all back. But as Mash said, we'll be back very, very soon to discuss the South Africa tour. Never a dull day in West Indies cricket. Some controversial selection issues there. So stay locked for that. Thank you for joining, people.
Peace.